Welcome to episode 2 of Not So Distant Shimming with the Marcocks. Today we have Paul, Carter, Gus, Leeson, Liam, and again on the line is Garrett. I'm your host, Zach, and if you haven't seen episode 1, we're gonna leave a link to it in the description and actually also at the end of the video. So
This episode isn't going to make a whole lot of sense if you haven't seen the first one.
yeah, they're all interconnected, and this one is very necessary to hear the first one, and it's called My Brother Charlie. So
And a reminder to all of our listeners, this is a podcast about our friend Gus's dreams. So, yes.
and actually, you actually came up with the name My Brother Charlie when you woke up, right?
Yeah, I woke up and the name just came to me like that.
It wasn't. We thought that was a cool name. It was just.
Usually when I write, I have trouble coming up with titles, but I just woke up after this dream and I just had like this name for the dream that I just had.
Yeah.
All right. Well, My Brother Charlie. Here we go. June 1990, Manhattan. The girl's eyes were gray. They moved unblinkingly across the city street, piercing through the river of bodies that pushed through, hurrying to get to whatever important spot they were supposed to be, most likely home as twilight engulfed the city. Times Square was alive, truly alive tonight, but rather than seeing billboards with flashing images and pretty colors, she saw distractions and cover. Perfect. The girl's gaze steadied on one of these bodies, a bald man in an expensive black suit and wrist adorned with an even more expensive watch. She focused hard on him, not letting him leave her sight even as more bodies passed between them. He was coming towards her now, and she never broke her stare even as he passed her with a momentary expression of trouble, which he dismissed just as quickly as he got her out of her sight. Odd girl. No more than 8, all by herself. She did not dismiss him, though. She considered him one more time, then nodded. As she did this, a boy of perhaps 14 or 15 not further down the curb returned the motion. He settled his gray eyes on the man, too. He shared these eyes with the girl, and the fair complexion and golden curly hair. It wouldn't take a second look to know they were siblings. As the bald man passed the boy, he picked up his step and began following. After several moments, the boy reached up and brushed his hair back. Just as this happened, the girl started forward, and a commotion broke out just in front of the man. A scrawny African-American boy and a slightly obese white boy had gotten into an altercation of some sort. "Don't go starting something you can't finish, fatty. Go screw yourself, numbnuts." The chubby boy charged forward and shoved his opponent hard into the bald man, and both fell to the pavement. The golden-haired boy rushed forward at this and reached down to help the disgruntled man up. "Are you all right there, sir?" he questioned as he grasped the man's wrist with both hands. As he pulled up, he slid the watch over the hand and tossed it over his shoulder in one smooth motion. The girl caught it and continued at a brisk pace without missing a beat. "I believe so," responded the man, still a bit dazed. He looked down at the boy who had helped him. The child was flashing a brilliant smile, and the man was taken aback by his kindness. The man began to look around, searching the street. Those two miscreants who were brawling. The youth these days have no consideration. I'm sure you know how it is. As he said this, he turned back down, and the boy was gone, as were the other fighting ones. He suddenly became frantically confused, and then felt his arm with a sudden realization of alarm. "My watch! Thieves!" he cried out. But too late for the expensive man. His young pickpockets had absconded into the sea of crowds. The girl allowed herself a smile. She was sure Charlie was proud of her. She was always happy when he was proud of her. She peeked over his shoulder to find him, and when she did, she gave him a quick nod of approval, followed by a small grin. She broke out into a giggle. She even began skipping a bit, despite the odd looks of the passerby. Charlie unlocked the small door with the key around his neck and entered the apartment. It was what they called home, small as it was. It consisted of exactly 2 small rooms, a combination living room/kitchenette and bedroom. The former was larger, yet still smallish, area that held a puny old sofa and a foam mat laid across the floor next to it. The entirety of it was painted a positively horrendous shade of yellow. The latter was composed of an ancient fridge, several cabinets lining the wall, and a tall counter accompanied by a few bar stools and piled with bills and notices. It was in terrible disarray, as it had been for the last 4 years or so. Empty bottles lay scattered across the entire floor, which was desperately in need of being vacuumed. Dozens of books lay discarded around the dwelling, most of them looking like they might fall apart at any instant. The fridge and kitchen cabinets were mostly open, and contained very little in the way of food. A small doorway towards the back of the living room led to a space maybe 10 feet by 10 feet and held nothing but a bed and more empty bottles. The only neat component of the entire home was the small stack of cash and valuables, all stolen in the far corner of the living room. This small stash was the only thing keeping the children alive at the moment, and they knew this grim reality all too well. Charlie carefully added their watch to their collection and seemed to wince as he noted how their supply dwindled. The girl noticed the pained face adorned on her brother's and opened her mouth to offer a word or two of comfort when a heap passed out on the kitchen counter let out a moan of sheer anguish. This shape that lay on their kitchen counter was unshaven and had rounded from years of inactivity and drinking. It had slicked back hair and deep bloodshot eyes that held horrendous pain beneath the storm cloud gray shade of their irises. "Isabel," it howled, snapping upwards, a tormented expression flashing across its face. "Don't you do it. No, Isabel," it yelled, the pain in its howls piercingly horrendous. The girl rushed over, fearful and concerned. "Papa, no. Mama's not here." A sudden calmness came over the shape, and he reached a gentle hand down to the girl. "My God, Isabel," he asked. "No, Papa, it's Susie. Mama's not here anymore." "What do you mean, Isabel? You're right here." Susie began to cry at this. Charlie had remained in the corner across the room with the valuable stash, watching this painful exchange unfold. The shape that was his father had barely put a coherent, sane thought together in the past 4 years. He had only left the apartment to buy his supplies from a nearby liquor store and spent the rest of his time passed out in various positions around the apartment. Charlie hated him. He hated him for not taking care of his children. He hated him for drinking so damn much. He hated him for not ever telling him how his mother had died. He hated him for once loving Charlie, as that made it even harder to hate him. Charlie rose and went to his sister, gently pulling the weeping girl away from the shape and taking her into a big hug, keeping his eyes trained on the shape, now passed out again the entire time. Pathetic, he thought. He led his sister over to the couch and had her lie down on it. She cried violently still, and he did his best to soothe her. "I miss Mama," she wept. "I know," said Charlie. She lowered her voice and drew closer to him. "I miss Papa." "I know." After Susie finally drifted off, Charlie stood up and walked past his father to the fresh bundle of mail on the counter. Flipping through it, it mostly consisted of bills marked "Final Notice" or "Final Warning" of some variation. He quickly discarded those, but one stood out. It was addressed to the shape with no return address or other markings on the blank white envelope. He opened it and began to read the neatly typed letter inside. "Greetings, Doctor. The order requires you again. We are well aware of your current state and need you to be aware that you will not be allowed to persist in this manner. The time has come, and your talents are needed again to complete the work you started years ago. It is understood another member of your cause, Isabel, was a casualty. It is further understood that you have engaged in a romantic affair with this individual. While the order believes that you are at fault for allowing such a course to transpire, it offers its sympathy for the emotional distress. However, despite past transgression, it is time for Protocol 18-23-45-67. You know the importance of what must be done. Call the following number, and we will be able to begin helping your current standing with substantial economic resources. We hope this generous offer compels you to return." Charlie felt his breath and heart rate quicken as he made his way through the letter, and 1,000 questions raced through his mind. He knew his parents were doctors of science, but what possibly could have been so urgent? How important was the shape on the kitchen counter? As he turned the letter over again, he came to realize his father was being offered money. There was no way anyone in their right mind would give the useless bag of booze anything. And what the hell did the letter writer know about the death of his mother? And then another thought hit Charlie like a missile. What if he was able to collect the money? He could get himself and Susie out of the city, far away from here. They could start over. But what if there was something else here, something Charlie was missing? There was too much uncertainty. His mind raced as he headed over to his mat, his head spinning at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Charlie hadn't managed a wink of sleep in several hours of trying. Instead, he turned the letter over and over in his mind, carefully considering his options. Yet no matter how hard he thought about it, there seemed to be some kind of block in his mind, like a stone in front of a cave that he couldn't get around to a logical answer. Charlie was always carefully methodical in his consideration of matters like this. He never liked emotions getting in the way. Finally, he resigned to the problem and decided to get outside help. He slowly rose from his mat, dressed quietly, and woke his sister. Susie, whispered Charlie, while he gently shook her shoulder. What? She mumbled, not happy about being woke. We have to go, Charlie murmured. No, where? She yawned, stretching her arms. Doesn't matter. Meet me outside when you're dressed. He hated having to wake her. He truly did. But he needed help, and he hadn't left her alone for 4 years now, and that wasn't going to change. Taking an 8-year-old onto the streets of Manhattan just past midnight was not the smartest move, but the circumstances forced Charlie's hand. The door clicked open, and a very tired Susie joined him in the hall. Charlie knocked on the faded green door, then looked over his shoulder to make sure Susie was still close. They were in a dimly lit alley about a mile south of their apartment in West Harlem. The building was dilapidated with peeling paint and broken windows now covered by boards. Gunshots rang out, and they were loud. Susie flinched at them. Close, no more than a couple blocks away. Charlie, she whimpered. He grunted in return, keeping his focus on the door. I'm scared, Susie said. Rather than respond, Charlie knocked again on the door, rapping harder than before. Susie sighed anxiously and looked around with wide eyes full of fear. She was perfectly fine being a good distance from her brother on crowded city streets and talking to strangers while he stole something off them, but that was always during the daytime. She had always been terribly afraid of the dark, and the walk over had been awful. She's convinced a monster, some unknown manner, lurked within each shadow, ready to strike at her. Her brother knew this, but offered no consolation to her. He considered fear weak. He was growing visibly annoyed now, and reached up to knock on the door again when it creaked open on hinges so loose they seemed like to fall off at any moment. The skinny boy from the fight earlier stood in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, wearing nothing but a pair of basketball shorts. Charlie, he asked, what the hell are you doing here? We need to talk, AJ, about something important. Another voice came from inside. This one was deeper, and it had a southern drawl. What is it? The voice asked. The larger boy also emerged from the threshold, blinking incredulously at their visitors. Nothing, Boo, AJ said sweetly, planting a kiss on his cheek. Just Charlie and Susie. Tommy, Charlie addressed the boy. Hi, Charlie, and the lovely Miss Susan, said Tommy, getting a giggle out of Susie. What brings y'all here so late? It's a bit of a long story. Can we come in? AJ and Tommy sat speechless on the bed, trying to process everything they had just heard. The entirety of the dwelling was a one rundown room containing a single bed and one bookshelf. AJ and Tommy had been squatting there together for the last few years. AJ was an orphan native to New York and had run away after years of abuse at the hands of the orphanage headmaster. Tommy was from Charleston, South Carolina, and it sounded like his family was fairly well off, but they practically disowned him when he came out to them. He decided to go to New York to be a movie star, but quickly discovered that wasn't happening. The way Charlie had heard it, AJ and Tommy successfully pickpocketed each other at the same time, and the following confrontation, when each discovered their belongings gone, led to their meeting. What's the number again? Asked AJ, reaching for the letter. Charlie passed it to him. AJ scoffed in disbelief as he read it again and handed the paper back. 000100101. Damn, that's gotta be government or something. I wouldn't be too sure. Sometimes big corporations buy them weird numbers like that, said Tommy. So at the very least, we know they're rich, powerful, or both, Charlie said. Rich is good, Tommy ventured. Rich is very good. You could get out of here. You could, AJ agreed. But powerful may be bad. These guys seriously sound like they mean business. And if they had anything to do with the death of your mom, they could be serious. Charlie sat quietly now, deep in thought. He looked over at Susie, who stared back with wide eyes. I'm calling, he decided. She doesn't deserve this. Aight, man. Whatever happens, thank you for these past years. Without you, I don't know if we'd still be kicking, said AJ. Without a doubt, Tommy concurred. No, thank you guys. You got us through everything. And with that, the three friends embraced each other, unaware it would be the last time. Charlie sat tapping the letter on his leg, staring at the payphone in front of him in a slightly crooked way, almost like he was sizing it up. He slowly reached out and snatched the phone off the hook, inserted his quarters, and began dialing the number. Right as he reached the final digit, however, his hand froze and he felt a deep, dark feeling in the pit of his gut, like something was trapped inside it, screaming at him. He began breathing quicker, and his outstretched hand began to shake. He closed his eyes and tried to shake the sudden fear from himself. Stop it, he thought to himself. You know this is the right thing. He opened his eyes and he felt his vision refocus on the final button. He drew in one last quick breath and held it in as he pressed it. He brought the phone to his ear and waited with terrible unease. It rang only once before the other line was picked up. It was a deep, rumbling voice that was still silky smooth.
All right. So, I know that where this dream takes place in the universe, but I don't think our listeners can tell yet, right?
Yeah, so we talked about it in the first episode, but the first episode takes place around 2016 or 2017, and this one takes place in 1990.
Yeah.
How did you know when this story was set?
I didn't really know until the end, but I was kind of getting clues that was taking place in the past. There weren't a lot of cell phones, not a whole lot of technology present. And then at the very end, I kind of figured something out that really told me this was in the past. And you guys will see that too once we get to it.
Well, the payphone was a sign too, because
Yeah.
those died in
Yeah.
America in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So you can tell it's definitely before the events that occurred last episode.
Yeah.
I had the question of, is there anything in the dream so far, or anything that relates to your other dreams so far? Anything that connects them?
Yes, there is, but you're going to have to wait till the second half. There's a bit of a twist that really relates them together.
Yeah, this dream is basically directly connected to the other ones, but it's not apparent yet.
Yeah, so I kind of have this main continuity that started with the story of James, Anna, and Nico, and this is kind of like sort of a spin-off, and I had several spin-off dreams that kind of stray from the main continuity,
Right.
and this is one of them.
Okay.
Wow. All right, so I was thinking, these two kids, the two kids were fighting earlier on the street.
Yeah.
Next thing we know, I guess the main character currently.
So the kids, they were fake fighting in order to get the man on the ground so they could pull off the watch maneuver. This was a very well calculated maneuver. They've been friends for a while, and we kind of figure this out once he visits their house. Yeah, it was all part of a planned maneuver to steal this watch.
So like two pickpocketers working together to pickpocket someone in a very fancy way, I guess.
Yep.
Just to clarify, we're talking about Tommy and AJ,
Yes,
right?
Tommy and AJ.
Okay.
So, at the beginning, you mentioned that Susie and Charlie had gray eyes, and I know that that's a very rare genetic occurrence. Is there any reason that this might have happened in your dream?
Well, they're siblings, and I think that kind of connects them. They look very similar in my dream, and I think that was just kind of it, and just kind of setting them apart and kind of giving them their own kind of personality together as siblings.
I'm just trying to figure out like what the basis of this story is, because this is a dream, not a book, and it things from the brain come together to make this story. So where is there any like special part about New York or Manhattan or Harlem?
Not particularly, but kind of. I think the significance of this dream I kind of feel that a lot of feelings that Charlie has for Susie are feelings that I have for my brother personally, and
Okay.
just kind of his obligation to take care of her. I feel a lot of that for my brother as well, and I feel like I'd do anything for him, and
Yeah.
So-
I think this was kind of me
Yeah.
projecting myself onto Charlie.
So it's a visualization of your personal goals with your siblings.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay.
So I was wondering, like, did you have a crazy day that day, or whatever? Because like, what prompted you to
Yeah,
dream
it's-
like that?
That's a great question. Actually, it seems as though days where I'm more stressed out or having a really bad day, or something really big happened that's not good, like it seems really bad days I have are the ones where I have these dreams.
Oh, okay.
And I also noticed when you were dreaming during that first fight that they were faking, did you know that they were faking it in your dream while you
Yes,
were dreaming
I
it?
knew they were faking it because I kind of switch perspectives here. It's really weird. I'm always from the perspective of a certain character, but it kind of switches between Charlie and Susie, whose perspective I'm seeing it from. But for me, it doesn't skip a beat. I don't have to take a second to realize, oh, I'm looking at this through Charlie's eyes now. I just know who I am and I know what they're feeling, and I just kind of like hitting the ground running, like in their mind.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about this, is because like in a dream that seems totally possible, within the realm of possibility, but that's something you never hear about in a book. Like you there's like different chapters where you're from different perspectives, but like in the chapter it'll say their name or something like that, or like specify that you're now someone else.
Right.
While here
Yeah.
you just and you're someone else.
And that's the way dreams can work sometimes,
Uh-huh.
where your mind can just decide, well, now you're this person and you understand because it's in your own mind.
Yeah, I kind of had a little trouble with that, just kind of wrestling with myself over, should I make this more chapter based and kind of spaced out like that, or should I just kind of make it more true to my dream? And I decided just to let it switch and kind of let the audience like kind of figure out whose perspective it was from, because I think it adds a little more psychological aspect to the whole dream aspect of it, which is what we're really going for.
I think it adds tension and it keeps the listeners on on their toes, or readers if you're the reader.
All right,
That doesn't really make a lot of sense.
we ready to get back into the second half?
I
I'm looking
think
forward
so.
to hear about the order.
Hello, Lee. I figured you would call, the voice purred. Many others in the order were not quite so optimistic, but I knew deep down you always believed in us. I'll have someone come now to get you. We're going west, Lee. We've already constructed the necessary installations to carry out the final phases of our work. Charlie gulped and felt a violent shudder run down through him. Whatever doubts he had now were magnified to a whole new level. Gaping for a moment, he finally found the world he needed. Sir, he quietly croaked into the mouthpiece. There was a deathly silence now, broken by only the deep, menacing breathing Charlie heard. Who are you? The voice asked, now with an air of calm intensity that Charlie couldn't respond to. I'm, he stammered, feeling as though his throat was being grabbed by some invisible, cold, unyielding hand that was tightening with each attempt he made to speak. I said, who the hell is this? The voice boomed, not sounding particularly happy. Lee is my father, Charlie spat out. Then silence took hold. Children, the voice sounded like it was on the verge of exploding. The breathing on the other line was speeding up and rising in volume, and Charlie felt his eyes widen with fear with each breath, and everything seemed to freeze. Then the line went dead. Run, a voice in Charlie's head told him. Without a second thought, Charlie grabbed Susie by the scruff of the neck and took down the dark, empty street, the dial tone still humming on the dangling payphone. Charlie panted with exhaustion as he looked down the hall of his home. He heard Susie's light footsteps behind him, and a moment later he heard quiet coughing as she tried to catch her breath. Stay here, he commanded, as he started striding down the hall. Charlie, he heard her whimper. He looked back at her, and she was truly frightened. He looked her up and down and then turned back down the corridor. He approached his door, which was wide open. He stepped into the doorframe and saw his father sprawled out on the floor, white foam protruding from the corner of his mouth. Behind him stood a middle-aged man in a black trench coat, facing away from the door. He had black hair, which was beginning to gray, was in a tight crew cut. He was lean and tall. He wore black combat boots and held what looked like a small phone next to his ear. He's ready for transport. I'm just waiting for the inhibitions, he said into it. He then turned around and came face to face with Charlie. Found them. And with that, he snapped the phone shut. In one lightning-quick motion, he whipped his hand into his trench coat and pulled out what looked like to be a large revolver. As soon as Charlie recognized this, he wheeled around and stumbled back down the hall. Just as he cleared the door from him, he heard a deafening bang and heard the drywall of the hallways burst apart. He sprinted towards Susie, half grabbing her, half shoving her along. The man in the black trench coat had been tailing them ever since they got out of the apartment complex. By some miracle, he hadn't been able to catch them in there, and Charlie had been so far correct in the assumption he wouldn't try to kill them in broad daylight in front of so many people on the street. Now he just had to find a way to shake him before he made it back to AJ and Tommy's. He saw a fast food place a little ways down the street and got an idea. He checked over his shoulder. The man was still stalking, maintaining 20 yards, his eyes staring right back at Charlie with malicious, hateful glare. Charlie leaned down to a crying Susie and whispered in her ear, "Stay quiet and do what I say." Susie nodded at this as tears continued to stream down her face. As the doors to the restaurant approached, Charlie slipped out of the crowd with Susie and hurried into the dining area, moving through it and past the counter, ignoring the angry shouts of employees as he made his way through the kitchen and toward a back exit. There was no way their pursuit would expect them to do such a thing. Charlie hurried through the door and broke into a run as soon as they were out. Susie did what she could to keep up, but Charlie soon had to slow down and allow her to catch up. Several minutes later, they arrived back on the doorstep of AJ and Tommy. Charlie didn't bother knocking this time. He burst in, ushered Susie inside, and slammed the door shut. A bewildered Tommy looked up from the Monopoly game he was playing. What the hell, he shot? AJ sat motionless on the ground next to him, stunned. Long story, big guy with a gun is trying to kill us, Charlie answered, beginning to move the bookshelf in front of the door. What in the name of God could you have said during that damn phone call? Tommy yelled. AJ looked to be finding words to say, but his mouth kept gaping open and closed instead. Then Charlie heard heavy footsteps thudding from outside. He slowly began to back away from the entrance. Tommy and AJ stood up, eyes wide, and locked on the door. A tense silence held everyone's breath in, and Charlie thought he might choke on the anxiousness he felt. Then the door exploded in a wave of sound and splinter. Without hesitation, Charlie wrapped his arms around Susie and tackled her to the floor as she screamed in terror. A quick glance upward revealed the door was being shot through, as it was poked with bolt holes. Charlie put his head back down and listened as the final shots rang out. Then he heard a loud thud. AJ, he heard Tommy whimper. Charlie scrambled onto his knees and whirled around. Tommy knelt over AJ, who had taken at least 2 or 3 rounds in the chest. He was reaching for Tommy with a red, dripping hand. He was making small, short, gasping noises as blood poured from his mouth. His eyes were alive with shock, searching wildly for nothing in particular. Then the gasp turned to chokes, and soon he began to shake. Tommy was hysterical, screaming at the dying boy. The door smashed and cracked as the man tried to break it in. Susie sat, hands pressed to her ears, screaming ceaselessly. Then the shaking stopped, and AJ lay still. Everything seemed to fade away for a moment as Charlie took in everything. He looked around, and the only sound he could hear was his own thumping heart in his chest. He looked past Susie to a solid wall. He turned and looked at the door itself, which had bent and was moments away from blowing in. He looked at Tommy, shaking and howling at AJ, and passed him to an open window shielded by a screen door. Everything seemed to come back into focus, and a wave of sound washed over Charlie. He grabbed Tommy by the shirt and yanked him over. Tommy, we have to leave, he shouted. Piss off, Tommy yelled. He goddamn killed AJ, and he's gonna kill us if we don't leave right now, Charlie impressed. Good, Tommy shrieked. You can avenge him. This seemed to make Tommy think. After a moment, his eyes closed with a sudden sullen anguish of realization. He bent down and gently kissed Tommy on the forehead, then stood. His eyes were pouring like faucets now. Charlie pulled Susie to her feet and approached the window. He began fiddling with the tabs on the bottom of the screen, trying to free it. Tommy then shoved him away from the window and put his fist through the screen. He then tore the screen apart and hauled himself through the opening. Charlie picked up Susie and passed her through the window before starting to put himself through the window. As he crouched on the sill, he heard a voice cry out. Boy, it said! Charlie decided it must be the man on the other side of the door. Don't you want to see your father again? Charlie remained quiet at this. He had no father, he thought to himself. He dropped down onto the street outside and heard the man behind them. I'll find you, boy. I will kill you. There is nowhere to run, nowhere for you to go. We are everywhere, he hissed. James sat against the dark wall, trying to figure out a way of their predicament. They'd managed to lose the trench coat, but had no idea what he meant with his final chilling statement. So they'd ran. They'd gotten as far as they could as quickly as they could, stopping only once they could go no farther for the day. They'd ended up in Central Park, just offshore of the lake, and decided Tommy and Charlie would take turns taking watch. Charlie got first and sat up watching the moonlight shimmering on the water, which reflected on his gray eyes. He was full of fear, but it wasn't fear for him. It was his sister. When their mother died, he watched his father break. He watched him slowly drown himself with the bottle and crumble down into the shape. The shape. That's all he was anymore. A shape in his life, not a man. The ghostly whisper of a man who had lost too much. A man too weak to care for his own damn children once he had lost. And so he seemed to take up space, and that's what Charlie saw. He didn't see his father. All he saw was a formless shape, a silhouette without color. The only flash he would ever see would be the desperation in the shape's stone-gray eyes, eyes that seemed to grow a little duller every day. As far as Charlie was concerned, both his parents had died 4 years ago. Over those 4 years, he'd seen something even worse than the loss of his father. He watched his sister try to live with all the tragedy. He watched her weep tears for days on end. He watched her scream at her father to talk to her. He watched her go into states of shock where she wouldn't eat, sleep, move, or speak. Those times were the worst, because then there were 2 shapes in the apartment. Charlie loved his sister. More than anything, keeping her alive became his purpose. Anything he could do to help her, he would. But first that meant getting rid of his own burdens. And so, gradually at first, but then quicker and quicker, he lost the ability to feel for himself. Passion and emotion were long forgotten, now strangers to the new Charlie and his new intent. They were baggage, unnecessary blockades, and the only thing that mattered. He heard a soft rustling and saw Susie turning uneasily. She rolled over and looked up at him. "You need to sleep," he told her gently. She shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. Charlie looked down at her, not sure what to say. "I'm afraid," she continued, "of the man in black." Charlie furrowed his brow at this. He wanted to comfort her, but he couldn't bring himself to lie to her. "Charlie," she whimpered, "I'm really scared. I thought you said you were calling Papa's friends. Why would they hurt Daddy like that? And they shot AJ." Charlie's mouth gaped helplessly as he searched for the right words to say to a frightened little girl. "Charlie, I want to go back home. I want to go home to Papa and Mama." And then for the first time in 4 years, Charlie felt a tear slide down his cheek. "Charlie, why do you hate Papa?" At this, Charlie felt something wake up inside him. Memories he wouldn't let himself remember returned, and feelings he wouldn't let himself feel followed. "Remember," Charlie started, "when we went to the zoo?" It was Susie's turn to sit speechless now, taken aback. "The zoo's pretty close to here, actually, in Central Park, but you know that. Anyway, remember when we were at the zoo, and you loved the polar bears? And when Mom and I wanted to go and watch the other animals, you wanted to stay with the bears? And so Dad stayed with you there for the whole day, talking with you about all the polar bears. All day you stayed in one place. He did that because of how much he cared about you and how much he loved to see you happy. I can't really hate him. Because of how much he loves you, I can try, but I can't hate him." Susie was smiling weakly now, and she sat up and they embraced in a deep hug, and they drifted off under the stars together. They were woken by a deep, blood-curdling scream. Charlie snapped to life and frantically jerked his head around, searching for its source. Then he saw it, and the blood drained from his face. The man was 30 feet away, and dangling Tommy above the ground, hands wrapped around his throat. With a loud, sickening crunch, Tommy's neck snapped and he fell to the ground. Then the man turned to Charlie and Susie, a malicious grin on his face as he began walking towards them, the confidence of a grim reaper in his stride. Keeping his stare leveled on the man, Charlie spoke. "Run." Susie took off, darting through the trees along the lake, hoping she was fast enough. She turned to see where Charlie was behind her, but he wasn't following. She skidded to a stop and whirled around. Charlie was running at the man. They collided, and Charlie went down on the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him. He curled up, coughing and gasping for air. From a pocket inside the coat, the man produced a long, large knife. He raised above his head and brought it down on Charlie. Charlie reached up and grabbed the blade, screaming as it sliced deep into his palms. It was inches from his chest, but still coming down upon it. He turned his head and saw Susie staring at the scene unfolding before her. "What are you doing?" he screamed at her. "Run!" Lee sat at a white table in a room with a single door and one light in the ceiling. The room was a dark gray, just like the one he had been in before. The one before had held him for what he guessed was 2 weeks. 2 weeks of sheer horror. The withdrawal had started nearly as soon as he woke up, puking his guts out. The bile washed down a drain in the middle of the room with a relative expeditiousness, but that was only the start. For the next 48 hours or so, he was a total wreck of nerves, aches, sweat, and piss. He would sometimes shake so bad he couldn't move or stand. Eventually, slowly, he began to feel better, and that was when things started slipping through a hidden slot in the door. First, it was a single measly daily cereal bar, which he would devour in mere seconds, and a small swallow of water. After several days of that, it came. It was a folded note, only holding 4 words. But they were the worst 4 words of his life. "The children are dead." He remembered screaming at nothing after that. He screamed for hours until finally his vocal cords stopped altogether. Even now they were still painfully strained and quiet. Then problems started coming through. He knew who had taken him almost as soon as he had woken up in this new existence, but the problems confirmed it. His old work rushed back to him, having been made blurry by the years of the bottle. He refused to do them. The bastards had taken his children. He became determined to die. He stopped eating his rations, watching them pile up at the front of his cell, and then he was brought to where he was now. No chains or shackles, just 2 tables and a chair. And then his old colleague entered. Lee's face was unmoving as he sat down opposite him. His voice was soft silk, yet still commanding as a captain. Lee, he smiled. It's good to see you. Lee sat stone-faced. He knew this one didn't kill his children personally, as he was never one for dirty work, but he had a feeling that he gave some order or another. The man frowned. Lee, we shouldn't be so cold. We used to do such good work with one another. We were changing the world. Lee continued his silence. Lee. Is this about the kids? Lee, you knew the rules. You knew why they had to go. Why Isabel had to go. They were distractions. Lee twitched at this insult. He wanted to strangle him right then and there, but he brought himself back under control. Don't let them in your head, he told himself. Lee, we need you. You know this. The world needs you, if it's going to survive. Come back, Lee. You couldn't save your own children. The man was cut off as Lee slammed his hands on the table. You killed them, my goddamn kids, you. I'm not doing any of this for you. You are your stinking order, he spat. The man smiled warmly. I understand, Lee, but you need to understand something. We have all made sacrifices. Not for us, for the order, but for the future. The man stood and walked around the table, placing his hands on Lee's shoulder. Join us. You weren't able to save your kids, but think of all the kids you can save. You know what's at stake, Lee. He leaned down to whisper in his ear. You know it's what Isabel would have wanted. And with that, he left. Lee stood in the airport. He felt the top of his head. His hair was thinning slightly, possibly from stress. He had it slicked back to hide it a bit. He hadn't felt stress in recent days. He hadn't felt anything recently. He stepped up to the security kiosk and held his ticket out to the officer. Flying to Denver, I see, she beamed. Yes, he responded dully. Well, enjoy your flight, Mr. She trailed off at his last name, trying to pronounce it. Eldwine. Dr. Lee Eldwine.
Dang. That is insane.
Holy crap.
So, the whole time, the father was Eldwine, and the kids were just the vessels of your dream to show how bad the order was.
Yeah, kind of. And I thought that at first. Like, I thought maybe when I was having this dream, like, kind of part of my own consciousness was still kind of there. And I was kind of thinking, is Charlie Eldwine? And
Yeah,
then
that's what I was thinking too. The whole time I was like, because the
Yeah.
title is My Brother Charlie.
Yeah.
So it would lead you to think that Charlie will become Eldwine, especially because he calls he calls the order, So maybe the order, I was thinking, would abduct him and do the same thing they did to Nico and Anna and James 20 or 30 years in the future.
Yeah, so Eldwine wasn't the product of the Order's experiments. He was he was a product of the Order's just sheer will to enact what they think is their righteousness upon the world, even though it's these terrible, terrible acts.
So, Gus, I had a question. Do you feel the pain in these dreams? Kind of like the knife going through his hand. Do you feel this pain?
So obviously I've never experienced like a knife or a gunshot wound, but I do feel like a really, really bad stinging sensation or something whenever that happens. Like, I think it's just my brain trying to fill in what it would feel like. But most of the pain I feel in these dreams is the emotional pain that these characters going through. Like, I feel like I'm going through when I'm having these dreams.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, one of those 4D experiences where, it's not really realistic, but
Well, it is really realistic. Like,
Well,
usually I feel like I'm there.
the 4D ones
Yeah.
aren't naturally, but the brain can actually send like the neurons to actually bring those stinging sensations and stuff.
It's weird. And I remember one of these dreams, I remember I was having one of them, and then my father actually woke me up in real life, and he said, "Hey, you were screaming in your dream," and I was like, "I was," and so it's gotten to the point where it's kind of coming out into the real world.
Because at the end you were Eldwine, that you were in the perspective of Eldwine, right?
I was in the perspective of.
So
Leo.
probably that's when you were screaming probably at the same time when he discovered his kids were dead because of the order, right?
Actually, I was screaming in that dream at the very end when I figured out it was Eldwine. It was just too much for me to handle, I guess.
Dang.
And so I didn't even know I was screaming until my dad woke me up and said, "You were screaming in your sleep."
Damn.
So the dream could have actually gone on.
Yeah.
If
but
your
it
dad
was-
there might have been. The
That's like the
amazing
perfect
thing
ending,
is
though.
it gives you signs before you hear his name. It gives you signs like he's
Like
going
Denver.
to Denver. He's in this a similar facility as Nico, James, and Anna.
She can't pronounce his last name.
So it's very similar.
Yeah.
And many people, whenever they experience pain in a dream, sometimes they'll wake up. So, like, the entire time you were experiencing pain, you just were
actually-
continuing to sleep.
I also noticed that, like, you're right. A lot of times people experience pain. It seems like the worst of the pains, like when Charlie got stabbed, while he was grabbing the blade, it seemed to be coming from his sister's perspective, almost like you didn't want to experience the pain and wake up, so it switched perspectives so you didn't have to.
Yeah, well, it was kind of as soon as they woke up from the previous night, it was from Susie's perspective that I was having the dream in, so I never really was from Charlie's perspective during that whole scene, but it was really scary in my dream to see this boy just grab a knife.
Oh yeah, totally.
You can kind of
Yeah.
start to notice a pattern with your dreams too, because same as last week. We started and the first half it was a little slow, a little dull, and it slowly picked up. And then after the intermission, it just went way up
Yeah.
there. It accelerated
it got
so
really
quickly.
It just goes out the door. It's crazy.
And so both of the kids actually died.
I will say this. We see Charlie die, but I have a feeling Susie will be back.
Okay,
Oh, man.
that's
And
some
I
serious
think
foreshadowing.
I will say this. Susie's alive. I'm going to spoil it.
No,
But-
don't spoil.
No,
spoil it that she's alive.
She's alive. She's alive.
I know her connection.
The
but
reason-
don't say that.
The reason the Order told Eldwine they were both dead was because they're just so smart when it comes to manipulating people that they knew that this would bring Eldwine to just madness and that it would lead him to do what they wanted him to do if he thought both the children
Well,
were dead.
And in the first story, it said that Eldwine was completely emotionless.
Yeah, and this is
And while
how-
he was in the prison, he said that he didn't eat his meals, and in front of the council who killed his kids, he was completely emotionless.
Yeah, and he snapped then, but it was the Order did just such a great job of just bringing all the emotion out of him so he could focus on his work because the Order thinks that's
Yeah.
what it needs to do to save the world.
Yeah, so last week you kind of asked about if Eldwine was emotionless because he went through the same thing. And this is, you said no, obviously, but this like really makes so much more sense than him
Yeah.
going to
So-
the facility and being, having,
Superhuman.
yeah.
I have all my dreams written down, and I decided to do this one this week because that was the question that really inspired me to write this one
Yeah.
for this particular episode.
Yeah.
So Gus, I was wondering, you call it the Order, right, in your dream? So what is it reminiscent of in real life? Is there like an influence?
Yeah, I think the Order is just kind of pressure, I suppose, in my life. And when I feel like there's so much kind of pressure just from society, just people in general to do what they feel is conformative, and they feel like that's what's going to be the right thing to like save the world or whatever. If people of our generation conform to this pressure, and they feel that it's so right, but we feel as though it's kind of horrible, just the things that we have to go through to conform to it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
You know, that's a really good point because there's all these societal expectations to like go to college, and they talked about like it's for the future. The order talked about like this is for the future, you know, and so
Right, yeah.
it's really interesting because that's so true with that societal pressure and stuff. Because like everyone's like, oh, you go to art school, your future's like totally screwed, which is not necessarily true. It kind of depends on how you deal with it. So the order is actually a really good metaphor for that.
Yeah, I think that's just my brain making up metaphors for what's going on in my life and converting them to these interconnected dreams. Because I think the dreams are kind of just my life, but to a more extreme degree.
Yeah. A lot more extreme.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening.
If you know how to interpret dreams, contact us.
We need a psychologist.